Hello and welcome back to another episode of Transport Fever 2. We're here in Brookshire County at our Lincoln Sawmill, and in this video we're going to be scaling up our operations in some areas, and then after we get done with that, we're going to start to think about how we're going to move passengers around this map. And so between episodes we've let our money build up a little bit, and I think first what we're going to do is pay off another chunk of our loans. So I think let's bring this down to 15 million on our loans, and that's a pretty good number to stop at for now. We have a little bit left over to use for our projects in this video. And so priority number one, as we mentioned near the end of the last video, is getting a third train running on here and maybe even extending the size of these trains so we can get just a bit more production out of them. If we take a look at our cities here, Santa Rosa is requesting over 100 tools now, and then Lincoln over here is almost at 100 tools. So ideally that means we'll want this tools factory at pretty much 200 production, more or less, by the time we end up scaling this all. And so we'll get the trains figured out, and then from there we can go and adjust our truck lines. And one little quick comment I want to make before we get into actually being productive. We changed the name of this city from Lowell to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a nice recommendation that someone had in the comments, so very much appreciate that. Unfortunately, all the industries around it are still going to have Lowell in the name, but hopefully if we do some industry building around here, we'll remember to rename some of these ones that we end up using to have the Pittsburgh name instead. And then right along that same note, still taking recommendations on renaming Santa Rosa. I've seen a few that I like, but I just want to leave this open a little bit longer to maybe get a few more suggestions in there. And so now coming to our trains, we're going to first make these longer before we start duplicating them, just so it's a little bit simpler once we get into all that. So we'll just come in here, manage the vehicles. We can then edit the selected vehicles. And then I think we're going to get 2 more flat cars on each vehicle. And then because we've added 2 flat cars, we will also then add 1 box car on the end of each, just so we can keep our line rates and ratios sort of similar. Since both cities are requesting about the same number of tools, we'll want to bring back half of the tools by train. So half the amount of box cars as we do flat cars should get us that amount. And so now these 2 trains have been modified. I think before we start duplicating and getting more trains, we're going to have to extend our double tracked area to follow along here a little bit farther. On this end, it's a little bit tricky deciding on if we want to bring the double tracks across the bridge or merge them before the bridge, but I think we're going to actually come across the bridge and bring it together, and then pretty much wherever we end up on this side should be fine. And so getting into this, let's pause so we don't create any issues with our trains while we're running. And for the most part, this is just simply dragging the tracks alongside our other set of tracks until we reach a point that we're happy to merge them together. And so I think right about here is a pretty good spot to just slide this over. And this seems to work out pretty well there. We'll come back and add the signals, but then heading out the other way, we'll delete this segment of track, and then we'll drag this around to the other side of the bridge. And so now that we're crossed and over here, we can place that down and then drag out a set of tracks until we get the speed limit where we want. So we want this to be max speed pretty much the whole way through this merge, and that looks good with 75 miles an hour. We can now come in here, add more signals, so we'll add ones there. We'll keep the 2 that we have here, as I like the spacing of those anyway, and then get our last set over here, which might be a little tricky, but works out just fine like that. Alright, now that this line is running, we can come in here and we'll start by duplicating it once. We'll see what happens there. We'll let the train space out, and then we can start to math out our line rate. Alright, and so things have been moving around a bit. Let's just take a look at our line rate and maybe try to figure out exactly how many planks and tools we're moving around here. So we can see that our overall line rate is 243, and we have 10 flat cars and 5 box cars. So if we want to figure out how many planks we're moving sort of in that same rate, we'll want to take 243 and then multiply it by 2/3, because that's how much the flat cars take up of the total train's capacity. And so looking at that, we get about 161. I believe the cars have the same capacity. I'm not sure, but yeah, they do, because our tools are at 35 and our planks are at 70. So at this current rate, we're moving planks at a rate of 161, which then would mean that we're moving tools at a rate of about 80. So I think if we want to hit our goal of supplying 200 tools from this tools factory, we'll probably want one more train on this line going back and forth. So we'll simply duplicate one more, although we don't have the money, so we'll have to wait for that. But while we wait for our money to build up, we will remember that we need a 4th train on here at some point, and we can start to take a look at our horse lines supplying and taking away from it, and make sure that those are updated as well. And so first of all, starting at the base of all this, we'll have to take a look at our logs and how many logs we're bringing in. And because the sawmill takes 2 logs to make 1 plank, we need to essentially bring in twice as many logs as we want for tools and planks. So again, if we're producing 200 tools, that means 200 planks, which then means 400 logs. Now that's going to get a little bit tricky, since our current number of horses has us at 236 logs, and it's already an extremely busy route. So honestly, it might not even be possible for us to hit 400 without just a ridiculous amount of horses, although I believe we unlock the next tier of those in 1870, so we're only 5 years out from getting better horses, so we might have to put that project on hold until then. So maybe we'll just wait it out. We'll hold off on the 4th train until then, when we can more reliably supply logs, since it's already pretty full on this road. Essentially doubling the horses that we already have running here would be extremely unrealistic. So that's going to be a project we put on hold for now, but I do want to make sure that we're getting our tools out of here in an efficient way. So let's take a look at our tool line, and this one's moving at a rate of 41. I think maybe we get a few more. And so getting our tool line up to a rate of about 60, I think, is a pretty good compromise. We'll just have to remember that our logs is currently our bottleneck, so our trains after a while might start running 2/3 to 3/4 full pretty soon. So it's not going to be perfect, but until we upgrade these trucks, it's just simply not going to work out. So we'll leave this and we'll move on to our next project now. And so now I want to come over to Allentown and take a look at our construction materials line. We'll bump up the rate of our trucks coming into the city. We'll also maybe balance out these trucks if we need to increase production slightly. And then I'd like to finally come back and finish up this quarry area that we weren't able to do, since back then we weren't making a lot of money, so doing all the terraforming and detailing was just simply too much at the time. And so if we take a look here at the city itself, it requires 122 construction materials, and it looks like we're supplying around 90. If we take a look at our line rate, 88, which matches exactly with what the city has. So let's bring this up by a little bit. I think if we get this up to 110-ish, that would be pretty good. We don't need to necessarily supply the entire number here, but bumping it up a little bit wouldn't hurt in terms of our overall production. Now we do have to remember that our bottleneck is our boat at the moment with 108 for the rate. So thankfully these trucks and this boat matches perfectly at the moment. And then coming over here, we can see what this rate is at 113. So it seems like there's no issue here. We don't really need to adjust any amount of vehicles that we currently have running over here. So then really all that's left to do with this whole area is to add our second quarry up here and then detail this area so it looks a lot more natural and more like a quarry. Alright, and so I think this result actually didn't come out too terrible. I kind of like it. It's a little bit different than sort of how I'm used to detailing quarries, but I think down here especially I kind of like. Let me know what you guys think of this, especially with all the bushes and rocks here. I wanted to add a little bit more sort of definition to the terrain, and I think doing some rocks and some small bushes really helped to add to that. And then we tried to blend it into where the forest got bigger, which kind of worked. We'll just sort of leave it for now. And then, of course, filling in the forest over here so we don't see that harsh distinction between the rock and the grass just sort of on the bare ground. We have sort of a tree line there, reinforcing that boundary as well. And I think the last thing we're going to do here, just to get a little bit more out of the land here, is we're going to grab our height map texture tool and just choose the temperate noise. And if we just give it a quick click here, that adds a little bit of texture to the ground. You get a little bit more hilliness, a lot more of like the smaller sort of finer hill details start popping up. And I think just giving this a few clicks around here, maybe we make it a little bit smaller and pop that in around here. And although you can't really see it on the surface, some areas from a distance, it really helps to just sort of add a little bit more roughness to the terrain. And so now I think that's good enough to enough to leave off our construction materials line, we can see Allentown is starting to get more of its required construction materials. And I think now that we do have some money, I want to fix this grid that we wanted to fix earlier but just simply didn't have the money to do before. And we're gonna have to sort of decide which one we want to end up rolling with here. And I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna get rid of these two streets and these two streets, since it seems like this side of the city has a different sort of grid system than this side, and I'm okay with that. But we are going to have to keep them separate, but also allow them to sort of join together. So hopefully we can just simply grab from this intersection here, bring that down, and I believe that should be straight. It's a little bit of an extreme hill, but I don't think it's too terrible. If we are worried about it, we can just delete these segments and then smooth out the land so that the hill isn't quite as bad. We can just simply do that real quick and then speed this up so we get a little bit more money to fill in here before the city does that. And so we're able to close off this connection. We can now come in here and we'll lock a bunch of our main roads so that the city doesn't mess with them too much, especially the grid that we like. So we'll come through here, lock almost all these roads, and then we'll move on to our next project. Alright, now while we were working on our construction materials line, our train has finally run through all of our reserves on planks, which means it's actually not earning us money anymore. You can see it's not quite full, and for a little bit now it actually hasn't really even been breaking even. So I think we do finally need to prepare for larger log throughput in this area, and I think the solution is just as simple as adding a new station somewhere over here so that all the logs can come through here, unload in this area, and then we don't have to worry about this weird thing going on with this road that only limits it to 2 trucks on this segment at a time. So let's first extend this road out, or I think we'll actually want to flatten a lot of this land first, since this is going to be a whole project, so we're going to want this to look good. So we'll just drag this out and flatten as much as we can. I think that should be good. And then extending this road, I guess we'll just extend it out as far as we can to something about here, and then we can just grab one of these and use this as our unload area. Alright, now that we have this new station area all done up, we can simply find one of our log lines. We'll manage that. We'll take it away from here, add this here, and this will simply just be an unload area, and we'll allow to use both platforms as well. And hopefully this will run a lot more smoothly than this little intersection did, and that'll allow us to get a lot more horses and logs in through this area. Alright, and so we can see that this is now running very well. We no longer have backlog of horses in this area. They're actually all waiting to leave, but if we check our new line rate, we're sitting at just under 300, which I think gets us about where we need to in order to have our trains leaving full. So we'll let this go. It'll take a while for that money and resources to start flowing through, but this should be a better setup for the future. Alright, and now coming over to Houston, we can finally get to sort of the main project in this video, and that's going to be moving passengers around, and I think we're going to do that by train. The goal is to go from Houston over to Salt Lake City, and then from Salt Lake City all the way over here to Portland, and then that'll just be a simple 3-stop line for the moment. We can extend it in the future if we wanted to. Allentown's not too far away, and we could maybe make it a loop that comes back around to Houston. But I think initially I want to set up a line from Houston to Salt Lake City, get that going, and then figure out how we're going to get from Salt Lake City to Portland, since there's a lot of water we have to cross in order to get from Salt Lake City to Portland, and figuring out where we want to do that is going to be pretty tricky. And so let's get things set up over here by Houston, and we're going to put this a little bit away from the city to allow the city to grow, and we won't have the station sort of just right in the middle of the city where we'll have to work around it for the rest of the playthrough. I think we're going to set it up somewhere out here, which might be nice. It'll be a little bit farther away from the center of the city, but hopefully as it continues to grow out, it'll start to come over and sort of take over the train station as the city gets larger. And then another reason for keeping it up here is the height. We want to keep it sort of at this height as we come around and then follow along this ridge, where then we'll cross over and land somewhere in Salt Lake City. That way we minimize the amount that we have to go up and down in elevation. So that would probably mean that Salt Lake City's train station is going to be somewhere in this area. And then, of course, once we get that done and we set up that line, the next problem then is figuring out how we're going to get to Portland. And so I think just so we can get this on a nice straight road, we're going to come over here and extend this road pretty much as straight as it can be. We'll just double check that that's straight, which it looks to be. And we'll just continue to bring this straight out until somewhere out here. And this will be where our train station then goes. Alright, so now we have our train station placed and located where we wanted. We had to straighten out some roads here to make sure that it's parallel with our main road, but everything should be good and functional now. I think next we'll get our station in Salt Lake City. Actually, I think we'll start off with our tracks over here in Houston and then see where that takes us in Salt Lake City. So, of course, we know that we're going to want to come out this way, and I don't think it really matters which set of tracks we go with. I think eventually in the long run we'll just end up using all the same tracks, or all 4 of these tracks anyway, but we'll stick with these 2 as they are the closest, and we'll bring this straight out a little bit so that gives us room in the future to expand our station if we need to. So keeping that straight will be good, and then pretty much from here on out we'll want to keep this as flat and straight as possible as we cross over this little stream and then come around our oil wells and over towards Salt Lake City. Alright, now we are back here in Houston, and everything is set up over on this end. We have our train station, we have our bus station here, and we even switched over the line to continue in this loop. Now, I would like to get a counterclockwise loop up going in Houston, but I just think at the moment there's not really a need for that, although I suppose we could move these stations around so that we could have 2 loops. So let's just do that real quick. I think that'll be easiest for setting us up for the future. So we'll get 1 stop, probably around here-ish, and then we'll get another one sort of right here off of our big main road over there, and then we'll have to redo this loop. So now that we have 4 stops, we can just go around like this for this line, and I think we'll get 4, maybe even 6 vehicles on each loop, since it is quite a trip to come all the way out to the train station at the moment. So we'll want to make sure we have the buses in order to keep up with that demand, and then we'll quickly set up a line going in the other direction. So we'll grab 6 more, and this will go around in this direction. And so now we have our 2 bus loops going around in Houston. Hopefully we'll start to see people starting to pick up on here, but we probably won't get any demand for the train station until we get a train going between these cities. So obviously our next priority is going to be connecting Salt Lake City to this train. So we'll want to get a street, or actually I think we'll want to flatten the terrain out here. And we'll flatten this a good amount, but enough so that the station is mostly flat. And then we can just simply drag a road across the front here, make sure it is perfectly level with the station. And then lastly, we can just extend this road straight through and then clean it up just like this. And so we'll also need a bus station out here, and we don't really have space to fit it between the road and the tracks, so I think we might just find a good spot over here once we straighten out the station, and then we can just simply get this placed probably about here and give it 1 building so that it has some extra capacity once things start filling in. And then I think doing this bus loop will be pretty simple, as we're still able to connect largely to the entire city. So we'll just add a stop here and then come back down, and that looks to be just fine. And so now the last thing that we need to do is build our train, which is going to come from this train depot here. This is very temporary until we have the money built up to build a proper train depot somewhere, just for like detailing and all of that. But this works just fine out here in the middle of nowhere, and we'll want to figure out a nice fast train to go between these cities, and something that's also not too expensive to start out with. Alright, so the train that we're going to try out here is a 440, the general engine with 4 passenger cars behind it. We have a lot of these engines that I got from the Steam Workshop, but unfortunately they're very expensive to run per year, and their top speed is currently higher than any of our passenger cars. So I feel like if we used any of these right now, we'd pretty much just be burning money, since we wouldn't be getting the most out of the top speed, especially with such a high running cost. So before we get to using these, we'll have to wait until we get some better passenger cars. But for now, I think the train that we have running now has pretty decent power. It can get up to its top speed in about 91 seconds. We could go longer, but I think I want to gauge the demand on the line first. So we'll buy this train, set it on a new line, and this will go, let's start over in Houston to Salt Lake City. So we'll do something like that. And it looks like it routed properly and the train is on its way. Let's take a look at it quick here. So here's just a look at that train. It looks pretty good. I think the 4 passenger cars behind it looks pretty nice in terms of length. So the track is pretty straight. We'll follow it along here as we go through. We tried pretty hard to stay along with the contour lines, so there shouldn't really be too many issues with going up and downhill. We did have to climb in order just to get to this flat area sort of up here at the top of this hill, but it's not too steep of a climb and the train should be getting to its top speed by the time it gets there anyway. We'll continue to follow this through, but you can see we still need to come through and maybe smooth out some of the edges. And up here, if we come to our bridge, it was pretty expensive, so we have to narrow it down to allow 1 track and 1 train at a time on this bridge. We do have the money to add a second track. Right now, I think it was about 2.8 million, but I think I want to wait until we have a little bit more money in the bank before we decide to commit to that idea. Now, unfortunately, also what this means is we're probably not going to be able to make it to Portland in this video, just because of all the bridges that we'd probably need, but that will be the next thing I want us to get done as soon as possible so that we can have more destinations along this line, which in turn will drive a lot more demand. And it looks like we're already starting to get a few people dropped off here in Houston. Hopefully it looks like we're getting a lot of people waiting over here as well in Houston, so looks like this new bus line is going to be a pretty big hit. We'll just have to keep an eye on it, but again, I think we'll wait, see what kind of demand this train gets, and then after we saved up a few million, which we'll probably do between episodes, we can then bring this track over and connect up to Portland. But in the meantime, while we wait for our buses and our trains to update demand between the 2 cities, let's just quickly come through and we'll soften up the edges around these tracks. We're not going to make it absolutely perfect, but we will just come through and smooth out some of the more worse looking areas, such as along here and just areas that generally need filled in. Alright, so now while we also wait for this train to go back and forth a few times to get a gauge on how useful it is, let's take a closer look at everything we've done in this video. I know this episode was a little bit differently formatted in the way we structured it, but we still did a fair amount of upgrading things and adding new details. So let's go take a closer look at that, and then when we come back, we'll be taking a closer look at everything else, what's next, and some of our finances as well. Alright, now we're back here over on our other train line, and it looks like things are functioning pretty well over here. If we take a look at the finances on this line, since we've made our adjustments, it seems like it's been pretty consistent in what it's making. So you can see some sort of regularity there, and it's consistently making us money, so that's great to see, and hopefully there should be nothing to worry about now as we scale up this line pretty soon. Our tools factory is operating pretty well as expected. It looks like we might actually be able to use 1 or 2 more vehicles here to deliver tools to Santa Rosa. So we'll just get 2 more trucks taking tools into the city. And then over here at the sawmill, everything is flowing very smoothly. Our new truck stop is working very well. If we can get a hold of one of these trucks and take a look at our logs line and the money that, well, the money it's not making here, it is a little bit more consistent than it was before, just barely losing money every period. But the goal, especially with horses at this stage, is to either have trains or boats make up a lot of their profit, as these are just simply moving raw resources to wherever would be best suited. So unfortunately, we are losing money on this line, but we are a little less than a year away from the next truck upgrade, so hopefully those trucks with higher capacity will be able to make better money off of the same trip. And then it also looks like tools into Lincoln can use a bit of an upgrade. It looks like this line is a little hit or miss. It could just be a little bit of irregularity on the line, which is causing this to fluctuate up and down. So perhaps getting a few more vehicles to supply this. I believe maybe if we get up to around 80-ish or 75, I think I'm okay with. We might be able to get a little bit more money out of this line and maybe a bit more consistency, as this line is pretty long. I did say if it doesn't end up making us money, we can just cut this road shorter, and that might help out. We'll let this play out and see what happens then. And then over here in Allentown, it looks like our construction materials line is doing well. This truck station isn't getting overloaded, and it looks like we're still earning money very consistently over here with these trucks. And so coming back over here as to what's gonna come next, obviously as stated earlier, first number 1 priority is extending this connection over to Portland so that we have a little more interest in the line with more destinations. So hopefully we'll get that added probably first thing next episode after we build up some money. Pretty much it's a waiting game until we get slightly better vehicles, but once the next trucks come out, we can upgrade this whole food chain, since Portland is now starting to demand a good amount of food, and we also have opportunities in other cities as well for food. So that'll also be something on our radar, same as just upgrading all of our other truck lines. I think that'll really start to push us over the edge in terms of money once we get things upgraded, especially here. This oil well, there's a lot of potential right now with the amount of fuel that Houston's requiring. So again, better trucks will greatly open up our possibilities on a multiple number of lines. And then as for some more resource chains, I really want to figure out how to get some resources to Pittsburgh and maybe even Tacoma over here, as these 2 cities don't yet have any attention diverted to them, but they're not really in the best spot for some industries, so getting resources to them will almost certainly come at a loss unless we can think of a pretty easy way to do it. Maybe we can have some farms up here where these rivers start, or maybe even out here, or even up here, and then somehow we can bring it down by boat, but then we'd have to come up with a food processing plant somewhere in this area, but that'll be a little tough. Although there is an opportunity maybe for Pittsburgh to get food from this food processing plant, so we can bring food from here over to Pittsburgh, and then maybe there's an opportunity, something we could do with construction materials, where we can then come up, grab a load of construction materials, and then bring that down into Salt Lake City or Houston. But I'm just worried about the distance between Pittsburgh and the construction materials plant. That's a lot of time for a boat to run empty. So, again, it's a little tricky, but that's really what this game's all about. So, if you guys have any ideas or you see anything to supply those cities, I'd like to get every city on the map at least starting to grow by giving them at least one resource. So I think with that, that's pretty much going to be it for this video. I do want to take one last look at our train here, if we can find it wherever it is. It looks like it's on its way back into Houston. It's carrying almost 20 passengers, which is not great, but of course those numbers are probably still climbing. Houston here has 21 people waiting, and the train's not even that close yet, so hopefully the return trip from Houston will be a bit better. And we can see here the money that it is earning. It looks like, I believe it had about 20 passengers when it dropped this load off, so pretty much in order to be making money from this passenger line, we will need it to be almost completely full. So if we just simply double this, that will get us to about 400k, which would be 40 passengers. So I think anything over 40 to 42 passengers on this train, then we can start to make money between Houston and Salt Lake City. But I don't think we're going to start to see those numbers until we add Portland onto the end of that line. And so let's just take a quick look at all of our lines again real quick. Our usual earners are getting us the most money, and as we scroll down here, we get into pretty much what's more expected. All of our short passenger buses not really earning us too much money, and then of course our passenger train currently being our biggest money sink at the moment, but once it does get up and running, I think this will be a very good asset for us. And so I think that's going to be it for this video. So if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions or feedback, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.